I made a $30,000 gamble to test the paradox of choice. Today, we'll talk about what this concept is, how I tested it by buying a new car with zero research, and how this all turned out for me. The paradox of choice, introduced by Dr. Barry Schwartz in his 2004 book, argues that having too many options can lead to anxiety, indecision, and dissatisfaction, even if someone ends up making an objectively better choice by having considered a larger number of options. He describes his experience in his TED Talk from nearly 20 years ago now of being faced with too many options when buying a new pair of jeans, and how he ultimately ended up with better fitting jeans than ever, but feeling worse about his decision.
So I spent an hour trying on all these damn jeans, and I walked out of the store, truth, with the best fitting jeans I had ever had. I did better. All this choice made it possible for me to do better. But I felt worse. Why? I wrote a whole book to try to explain this to myself. The reason is, the reason I felt worse is that with all of these options available, my expectations about how good a pair of jeans should be went up. I had I had no particular expectations when they only came in one flavor. When they came in 100 flavors, damn it, one of them should have been perfect. And what I got was good, but it wasn't perfect. And so I compared what I got to what I expected, and what I got was disappointing in comparison to what I expected. Adding options to people's lives can't help but increase the expectations people have about how good those options will be. And what that's going to produce is less satisfaction with results, even when they're good results.
At the heart of his argument is the idea of aiming for good enough instead of perfection. Schwartz calls this mindset being a satisficer rather than a maximizer. A satisficer sets clear criteria for what's good enough for them and stops searching once they find it. A maximizer, on the other hand, keeps chasing the best by weighing every possible alternative. One key point here, though, is that you define what good enough means for you. So satisficing doesn't mean settling. It's really a mental shift, though, that can ultimately save time, reduce stress, and improve happiness. While reading this book, I still had a reliably functioning car, as can be seen on some of the road trip videos featured on this channel. I was struck by the idea that really implementing these paradox of choice strategies could totally change the process of buying a new car by taking a satisficer approach rather than trying to absolutely maximize everything. So let's compare in a hypothetical with two car buyers who have completely identical needs. The maximizer spends hours researching online, making spreadsheets, visiting multiple dealerships, and test driving every option they can find. Their goal, of course, is to ensure that they don't miss the absolute best car on the market for their needs. On the other hand, the satisficer defines their needs upfront, or says what their good enough is going to be. They visit two dealerships, test drive one car at each, and they buy the better of the two cars the next day. It's easy to see how the satisficer might feel happier immediately. They saved hours of effort and they avoid the stress of overthinking their decision of trying to compare numerous choices. But the paradox of choice goes further than this. It actually argues that the satisficer is often happier in the long term, even if the maximizer ends up with, in this case, the objectively better car for their same identical needs. So why is that? Well, one reason is opportunity cost and the opportunity cost of opportunity costs. For the maximizer, every car that they considered but didn't actually choose represents a bit of a lingering what if, the features that they liked but ultimately had to sacrifice for their final pick. And these trade-offs can create dissatisfaction even when their final decision car is better. The Satisficer, on the other hand, is aware of fewer alternatives, in this case, maybe just one, and they've mentally focused on their good enough criteria. They've trained themselves to really value what meets their needs rather than obsessing over what doesn't. And they've also just seen less options, so they have less to compare to and less what ifs in the back of their mind to even contend with. It ends up being a lot like Schwartz Jean's example. The more time and effort that you put into a decision, the greater the risk is that you end up with an objectively better outcome that still feels subjectively worse. And while many of us naturally think at first that an objectively better choice is what we should ultimately be striving for, reading this book helped me to shift my mindset to being focused more on the subjective feelings, because really, that is how we experience life. I decided to put this all to the test by buying a car the Satisficer way. My good enough list was pretty simple. I wanted something reliable, safe, spacious enough for mountain adventures and the gear that goes along with them, and comfortable enough for potentially some long road trips at some point. My old Subaru Crosstrek had been fantastic for 410,000 kilometers, so getting another Crosstrek seemed like a reasonable option. I'd also heard good things about the VW Taos. So here's the twist. I did absolutely no research. No Googling, no online reviews, no brochures from the dealership, no asking friends for opinions, and zero spreadsheets. So this was a complete departure from my usual maximizer habits at that point, where I would have spent weeks comparing pros and cons lists, doing test drives, trying to weigh every possible factor and option. Conveniently for me, there was a VW dealership directly across the street from the Subaru dealership. So I went and test drove the Taos at the VW dealership, and I then walked across the street and test drove the Subaru Crosstrek. I decided that I slightly preferred the Crosstrek, and the next day I put down my deposit and didn't look back. So how did my $30,000 Satisficer experiment work as I tested the paradox of choice? Well, a year later and about 16,000 kilometers later, I am pretty happy with my choice. The Crosstrek meets my good enough needs. It's reliable, spacious enough, gets me to the mountains and the airport comfortably. Sure, there are some small annoyances, the main one being going back to a traditional key instead of the wireless key fob I was spoiled with before, but that's a pretty minor gripe to have. I really haven't felt any regret over my decision, and the ease of the buying process and the decision-making process is something that I still appreciate. Really, this approach saved me a lot of time and a lot of mental energy, and I'm definitely no less satisfied than I would have been with a more exhaustive search. And I also suspect that there is something about not knowing what you don't know, and there's likely an element of not even fully being aware of the potential opportunity cost issues that I avoided by keeping such a narrow scope and by keeping a mindset of just looking for good enough. If the paradox of choice resonates with you, I encourage you to experiment with limiting your options and see how it feels. You don't necessarily need to start with a $30,000 gamble like I did. Maybe try it with a smaller but still significant decision and see how it feels. I suspect that you will also find that in our world of too much choice, intentionally limiting your options can actually have great benefits. For more on the paradox of choice, check out Barry Schwartz's book or his TED Talk. Links are in the description for both. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.